It will be discussed by Mateusz from Polygon, Michael from Fantom, Will from Kusama, and Martin from Q. So, moderated by Daniel, Validator Commons. Big applause.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel. I used to be at Stakefish, but now I help with Validator Commons, a working group for validators. I think what we first do is do quick intros, name, title, and the organization or blockchain that you work with, and then we can get into some questions. Yeah, you go first.
Hi everyone. My name is Will. I'm a member on the Kusama Council. I'm very associated with Polkadot and Kusama, substrate-based chains. So I'm also a validator on both networks representing a global stake, Lucky Friday. So if you see us around, please stake. I pass it on to the next.
Thank you. My name is Mateusz. I'm the governance facilitator at Polygon. So I basically oversee all of the governance-related efforts across our products.
Hi, my name is Michael Kong. I'm the CEO of Fantom, which is a layer 1 blockchain protocol that's EVM compatible. And yeah, happy to be here today, and thanks again for the invite. Really appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Martin. I'm with the Q protocol. I'm one of the co-initiators. You can find out about the Q protocol on q.org. It's a governance-focused layer 1.
Cool. So I think maybe most of you all are pretty familiar with like the staking infrastructure, but I think for perhaps this, right, not all proof of stake blockchains have a level of the type of on-chain governance that we will probably be talking about today, though there are different types of governance that you could express technically. But right, we have like a collection of different L1s, or what we would call L0s and L1 chains. Maybe you can talk about the L1, L0 stuff too when you do it. But yeah, let's hear how each of your ecosystems do participate or facilitate governance with the infrastructure service providers that you guys host or want to curate through the validator set. So we can go down the line as well. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so just to give some background on the governance for Polkadot and Kusama, it's most of the votes, right? So we have 3 main entities, and I will call the first one any stakeholder. Anyone who owns a token can initiate a governance proposal. Anyone who owns a token can vote, right? So it's not specifically based to validators. There is another entity called the council, and the council is elected by any of these token holders elect the council. The council has a special role in that it governs the spending of treasury funds. It has some other aspects, but I'm keeping it simple. And there's a third body called the technical committee, and that technical committee speeds things up if necessary, right? So that's more or less our structure. There's a vote every launch period, which is 7 days on Kusama and 28 days on Polkadot. So the difference really is some timing between the 2 chains, right? But the core is very similar. We are transitioning to a new governance model, maybe next week, maybe this week. It's that soon with the TM, right? And this new governance model removes some of those responsibilities under the TC and the council and puts it all to the people, right? So all to the token holders. And it provides some more concurrency so that you can vote on multiple things at the same time. So yeah, that's some of the, that's our framework. In terms of validators involvement, we vote just as any token holder and with the bonds that we provide, not necessarily the bonds that that people nominate to us. There is a delegation system, so if you believe that someone's responsible, you can nominate your validator in, and you can delegate your votes to him. And finally, you know, in governance 2.0, we can separate that a bit more, right? So,
Cool. Yeah, Mateusz.
So for Polygon, I would differentiate between two layers of governance. The first one being the network layer, and the second one the community layer. So for the network layer, we basically emulate Ethereum in that we rely heavily on rough consensus. We are a Cosmos SDK based layer 2, and so we do rely on the validator's stake to make decisions about where the chain should go, what kind of upgrades should be adopted, etc. And from the Cosmos SDK, we also have the on-chain governance module, which can be used for parameter changes on one of our pieces of architecture, which is the HanDao. For the community layer, we also recognize that things like ecosystem building and you know, grants, all of that can benefit from a certain degree of decentralization, and so we've been experimenting with new primitives there to introduce that. A couple months ago, we have introduced a zero knowledge private voting that is also Sybil resistant. So something like what Gitcoin uses, but we also do it fully on chain. The claims themselves, the reputational claims, which, for example, say you're a unique person, they are on chain and they can be you know, verified on chain as well, and they can then be used to participate in governance. And so the main experiment we ran was a round of grants, or a grant battle, so to speak, where any person who could verify that they are in fact a unique human using some sort of, you know, off-chain verification resulting in an on-chain claim could then participate in voting and in building that program. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So Fantom is a proof of stake network. It's always been proof of stake from the very beginning. And the proof of stake mechanism right now, which we're thinking about changing to make it a bit better and a bit more efficient, is like quite straightforward at the moment, right? It's just you vote to confirm transactions, so you can you can set up like validator nodes, and then people can either stake directly with the validator node, they can delegate to the validator node, and the validator node owns some of the fees, or if you set up your own validator node, you keep all the returns yourself, plus 15% of the rewards that are issued to the people who delegate to it, right? It's not delegated proof of stake though, it's a purely proof of stake chain that is leaderless, meaning that all nodes are created equal. So anybody in the network can set up a node whenever they like to. All nodes follow the same behavior. There's no like governing council or any like points of centralization in that respect. So that's like one aspect of governance, and you need 2/3 of the total validating power of the network to confirm a transaction into as part of the final chain as well. The other aspect of consensus or governance has to do with like what you can vote on as well with your staked FTM. And you can vote right now on like plain text proposals. So these are like indicative proposals about what you'd like to see change on the network itself. And you can set a threshold of say 66% of staked FTM participation. But we're also implementing right now in testnet being able to change directly the network parameters themselves. So for example, being able to change like the minimum staking requirements for validator node, being able to change how much rewards that stakers get and delegators get, etc. So there's a number of different parameters that people will be able to directly vote on, and if that threshold is passed, then people can call a function to basically upgrade the network to make those changes in the network, because all the staking is governed by what's known as a special fee contract called the SFC, and so that distributes rewards and basically like organizes how the entire proof of stake system works on Fantom. So we also have like a separate smart contract connected with the overall like proof of stake network network part of the chain as well.
And yeah, Martin, I guess yeah. New protocol with Q.
New protocol. As I said, the Q protocol is very much focused and built around governance. So going into all the details would probably not be something that we have enough time for, so I'll just keep it brief and focus on three things that differentiate the Q protocol from other layer ones. So firstly, the whole governance framework is built around a constitution, which is obviously called the Q constitution, which is the framework. It's actually a legally binding contract between all participants that act within the network, all stakeholders, whether it's nodes, validators, participant token holders, or even applications that build on Q. So that's the first one. Now, secondly, there have been other layer ones that have tried, experimented with constitutions or similar concepts, and those have more or less failed, I would say. The reason being that those constitutions were not really enforceable within the protocol. So the infrastructure, the architecture that we've built in the Q protocol is really tailored towards ensuring that whatever the constitution says can actually be enforced within the protocol. So without getting into all the details, but some of the aspects that are relevant here are, first of all, there is a second type of node besides the validator nodes, which are called root nodes, which are independent, both logically, functionally, also in terms of incentives, independent from the validator set, that have special governance functions and have the task to enforce the rule set. There is a dispute resolution mechanism, which is important. If there are disputes, how are those resolved within the protocol? And all of that is baked in. So whenever there is a decision to change the protocol according to its rules, we make sure that the protocol has the means to actually enforce that. Thirdly, the rules of the system don't only apply to the layer 1 itself, but can also be used by applications or DAOs building on top of Q. So you could have an application, a DeFi application with a certain rule set that can integrate into the Q governance and thereby make the application itself more robust and essentially just prevent governance exploits.
Cool, thank you. So this is, anyone can take this question now. There are many proof of stake protocols, L1s, L0s, that have staking implemented, but not all of them have this sort of participatory on-chain governance aspect. I think most of you guys do have that in your ecosystems. What would you say is the advantage, or why did you select that particular feature to be exposed on your blockchains and write the pros and cons of it versus not having it, right? Ethereum, for example, does not have that type of participatory governance, right? And a lot of people have, right, compared it to like a tyranny of the devs versus tyranny of the majority kind of situation. So maybe like why you do believe that having this participatory on-chain governance for people who are both technically sound and not technically sound to have the same type of kind of voting power, and then what you guys think is special about your process, right? Because like as an example, like with Kusama and Polkadot, you have like a technical council versus not. Some of you guys don't have that type of separation.
So I think overall in the decentralized spirit of things, that participation is needed. It shouldn't be imposed. We shouldn't impose that, okay, in this runtime or in this binary, there's going to be a change to the min commission or a change to the number of validators, and you just have to accept it. There should be a way in which the community by large and the spirit of decentralization votes and comes to a consensus. And that particular, having token holders participate is a good way to get that view and have that inclusion in the decision-making process. So that's where governance 2.0 goes. Giving the people that power to make their own decisions. I think as well when we look at regulatory bodies looking for someone to target, if it's the council or TC or an identified body making the decisions based on everyone else, I think removing that, and that's what governance 2.0 goes towards. I think that's a direction in in the spirit and keeping of things. That's yes, one opinion on it. So I don't know what my other colleagues would say.
So I think I would push back a little bit on the idea of Ethereum as not having an on-chain participatory aspect of governance, and that is because the consensus that is gathered in validators does not have like a coordination layer over it, but it's still pretty inclusive. I can go in there and propose things, and as long as I can get consensus by any means necessary, those means aren't kind of given from any top organization. As long as I can gather that consensus of first, client operators and then the validators themselves, then I can impose any sort of change I want. And so I do, however, see that the aspect of what is interesting in like a designated on-chain module, right? It is that this participation is sort of empowered, right? If it has like a clear route towards execution, then it does add to what you've mentioned, the dilemma between the tyranny of majority and the tyranny of devs. I believe that the greatest place blockchain can find itself in, or on-chain governance or consensus-based governance can find itself in, is something that Aristotle defined in his political philosophy as the wisdom of the crowd, basically. If I am a sailor and you are a doctor, then we can basically go on a ship together, and I can sail it, and you can heal me if a shark eats my leg. That's basically what it means, that we can benefit from the wisdom and the virtues and the expertise of each of the members. Whereas if we rely on only one person who is a very good sailor, a very good doctor, if they die, we're done.
I'm trying to keep things very simple, but there is another body in Governance 2.0 called the Fellowship, which provides that they can be the sailors or give some direction and stuff like that. But I understand your point.
What would you? I love the Aristotle quote, but like, what would you say to the Osho quote that everyone is like memed to death, right? Like, democracy is for the people, of the people, by the people. But if the people are not as smart, right, then you have democracy by the
You put it very politely. I know what you're talking about.
So I'll also grant an answer from Aristotle here. The issue is that people are not virtuous, right? Which in our today's words means they're not educated. And why they are not educated? That is because in democracies, they only learn how to be ruled, meaning how to be participant of the system, but only like in a sort of person being ruled over. And Aristotle would define the virtue of a good citizen as the virtue of both knowing how to be ruled as well as knowing how to rule. Meaning only when you have the two of those can you have a virtuous citizen who is able to push the whole thing forward. And so what blockchain does, interestingly enough, is it allows for that convergence to happen, because anyone right now can go in and propose a change, whether on chain or off chain, and have that be kind of his way of participating. This isn't possible in our regular democracies. This is why we deal via representatives, right? We don't have direct access that is now granted by this technology.
Awesome. Yeah, Michael.
I would push back a little bit on the wisdom of the crowd. I think it works for many things, but by far not for all. So if you go with the wisdom of the crowds, often you end up having the kind of tyranny of the majority, and versus tyranny of the devs or tyranny of some group. Really, I would like to have basically a tyranny-free protocol. That's the ideal, and our way of going about it or implementing is to have a framework that is known to everyone. So you know the rules and you can participate openly. It's completely free, permissionless, open source. But if you participate, there are boundaries within which you can move and within which decisions are made, and it's transparent for everyone. So you kind of try to avoid the situation where a silent minority is basically taken over by a silent majority is taken over by a loud minority, or the other way around?
Yeah, just kind of like 2 points I want to mention. One is about when it comes to democracy, what it means to be voluntarily engaged in democracy and what it means democracy by the government, right? Because I think a lot of people out there who criticize, say, proof of stake or governance say, oh, well, you see, democracy doesn't really work because it's like a tyranny of the majority. There's a big difference, though, between democracy when it's voluntary and democracy from the government. And that is, one actually is voluntary, the other one is not. Because if I don't want to participate in a particular network, if I don't like how it's governed, if I don't like any aspect of it, I can always choose to opt out. And how that network is voted upon doesn't really impact my life because I can opt out. The big difference with government is that you can't opt out of government, right? If you don't participate in voting, well, some countries, like such as Australia, where I'm from, have compulsory voting. But even if you don't have compulsory voting, people can vote to impose things on you, and you can't opt out of it. So that's a big difference. It's not really tyranny of the majority when it comes to blockchain protocols because it's all voluntary. The other thing I like to mention is when it comes to just control over developers versus validators, etc. I think that they're all complementary together because the problem with the wisdom of the crowds is that there's always information asymmetry, right? And there's no right answer to it. If we lived in a society where everyone had perfect knowledge, everyone was experts in everything, then it would be different. But the fact is that we're not, right? So people are always trusting other people. People are always trusting that the devs push forward the code. It's not necessarily the case that all the validators know exactly what the code is being pushed at because they're not all experts in consensus, right? And vice versa. So a lot of it is based on trust, and a lot of it is basically people coming together in consensus and having the right economic incentives in place to make sure that people behave appropriately, so they're confirming transactions that are supposed to be confirmed, and that the code is running well. And so, in my opinion, if you have the right economic incentives, you can have a system that works pretty well, even though people, even though there's a lot of information asymmetry that might be taking place.
So both what Mateusz touched on and what you touched on, Mike, is that right. I have a question then, because you brought up the multiple client ecosystem for Ethereum, and then perhaps that type of governance that they do have is the right to express which type of software that you run on your nodes. So there's a interesting example, I think a couple earlier this year, maybe you guys are all familiar with it, right? So I think it comes down to also what you were saying with virtue, right? If virtue is sort of this responsibility of the privileged who at least have this information asymmetry, where do you think the responsibility lies with how these ecosystems get propelled forward, right? So as an example, as a validator ecosystem that does get to implement and deploy these governance decisions into essentially what are live production environments, because we don't see a lot of these code changes going into a testnet before they go on to these blockchains. Whose responsibility is it to basically read that code, right? For the Ethereum example, there's client teams that have code that they push on, and then individual Ethereum validators will choose one of the many six clients. But then if there's a bug in the code, the majority of the Ethereum validators are not checking that themselves, or the client teams are perhaps not going through rigorous audits because, frankly, they're not very well funded. That also is happening, I think, more often than not at a faster pace, perhaps in these non-Ethereum proof of stake blockchains. The example is what happened on Juno. Don't get me wrong, I love Juno, but right, there was a typo in the code. None of the validators checked the code, and then $36 million went to a dead address. So then, if that is the expression of governance, even without this type of on-chain participation, where do you see the responsibility lie, both at the foundation level and also at the validator level? I'd actually be curious, right? Yeah.
That was a question for me?
For all of you guys, right? Because you also run a validator. Yeah.
So I think that the type of responsibility needs to be defined as well, right? If we're talking about legal responsibility or just a general kind of, this all went down, where did we go wrong? I think that since for projects in our space, there are no bailouts from governments, right? We are not irreplaceable or too big to fail, as we have seen time and time again. I think that the responsibility ultimately rests with every participant of the system. It's just in a different degree and a different manner. So the way I would imagine it is that we have different checks and balances, similarly to what we have in established systems, where a president, let's say, the validators can execute code, but that code has been previously proposed by someone else, and so all of that is being checked by the judicative branch, which is the already existing code, that it's all functioning properly. And so all of those pieces, I believe, come together in that sense, and each one of the system's participants has their role to play. Even if we're talking about the regular user, I believe that being informed and making good decisions, even which chain or which application layer, which application you're using, I think this is also a part of that responsibility.
So maybe I can also answer this for the Q protocol. There is actually a framework with different roles and responsibilities between different stakeholders in the system. So if you have code changes, if you have proposals that affect the code, there is depending on the level of severity, it has different thresholds, it has different approvals that need to be made, or veto rights of certain stakeholders in the system. Having said that, I think taking a little bit of a broader perspective, I think it's actually an opportunity for validators going forward. I mean, I don't think that this is an instance where the wisdom of the crowd works well. I mean, if everyone relies on everyone else to check the code, then no one does at the end of the day. And maybe take an analogy from traditional financial markets. There are expert companies which provide proxy recommendations. And I envision something similar to happen in the crypto space, where I believe today actually many validators don't vote, many custody providers don't vote because they're afraid of the liability. They maybe don't have the resources, but I think that's a wrong way to think about it. I think it's the right way to think about it is about a business opportunity, getting into that field, and ultimately selling also recommendations and quality checks as a service. That's kind of the direction also that we want to go with the Q protocol, to have those specialized functions or opportunities for people that are specifically skilled and want to take up the role.
Yeah, I'll just like to probably break it up into 2 points. Any token holder with the governance 2.0 model can designate that, okay, if this is a technical matter, I'm going to delegate my votes to technical people. If this is a social governance matter, I'm going to delegate it to someone. If it's about treasury spending, I'm going to delegate it to someone. So you can direct your vote to respective parties that you think are responsible in their respective areas of interest. So I think that's quite useful, right? When we look at quality control and getting specific to applications and publishing new stuff, we in the Polkadot ecosystem, it's a bit different. We have a West End, which is like a test net, right? But then we have Kusama. Kusama is not exactly like a test net, because when you push things to Kusama, there are people actually using the system in almost like a real world manner. So it has helped us shield Polkadot from some issues that arose. We would push a new runtime. It worked perfect in testnet. We pushed the runtime into Kusama, and then we noticed something, and we're like, whoa, we need to fix this. But it never got pushed to Polkadot yet because it didn't pass that stage. So, things are a bit different in terms of that QA, QC type thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think philosophically and morally, when it comes to like responsibility, putting the legal stuff aside, ultimately, in the free market, each person is responsible, for their own actions, right? And so you kind of have like a race to the top in a free market, in that, even if you don't have the knowledge as say like a core developer for a blockchain protocol or other aspects of the protocol, ultimately it's your responsibility. And if people, for example, if there's like a bug in the code or something goes wrong, you can always move to a competitor, right? You can always choose not to participate in any blockchain protocol you want, right? So in the end, there's an economic incentive, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of develop stuff in a good manner, right? And so the economic incentive in terms of like a core engineer is that one, they can get paid a lot of money to build this sort of underlying technology. For example, it can be funded by, the validators or the participants in the network. Or two, they know that if their code is wrong, if something goes wrong, that people will just leave with the competitors, that they won't make as much money, and that their reputations, will be tarnished, right? And so there's clear like economic, and social incentives for people to kind of act in the best possible manner. Now, does that mean that there will never be bugs? No, of course not. And we've seen that time and time again. Does that mean that everything will always work fine in the end? No, of course not. But what it does mean is that there are incentives to get better and better quality applications out there and better software out there. And I think that's what is really, really crucially important.
Would you say then that I guess it's kind of like everyone's responsible for the problems? What about like so this is like law of the jungle versus like a very American-centric paternalistic regulation type of model, right? So then like, what about the poor retail that doesn't have the ability to think as deeply technically or look into the code themselves? Do you see that they just have to do their research and then rely and trust, and if they get screwed, they get screwed?
Yeah, well ultimately, just like in terms of like the goods and services that we buy as individuals, in the end, we're all people buying without much knowledge, right? Like we don't have knowledge about like, how did the fruit come to our supermarket, or, the quality of the fruit, or, the packaged goods that we buy and that sort of thing. And so, in the end, you do have to rely on people that, have more knowledge about a particular area, because in a sense, there's the specialization that goes on in the economy, right? It's called like the division of labor. And so you can't be an expert in everything, but you have to trust a lot of people. We trust a lot of people when it comes to like healthcare, like doctors, nurses, that they know what they're doing, because you don't really understand the technical implications of, how surgery works, right? But in the end, there are incentives for the experts to, as I mentioned before, try and like give the best services they can, because if they can't, there's always competition out there, and people will gravitate towards those that have a good reputation, that kind of have proven themselves over time, and basically like engage in those services. And taking it back to kind of like blockchains and validation, people will gravitate towards validators and networks that they see are being governed in a proper way, where they think that the software is excellent in terms of performance and in terms of security. And so you kind of get like a race to the top. You get higher quality over time when you have a free market that operates. What gets in front of a free market is basically government intervention, right? Because governments, first of all, don't really have, the knowledge of what like everyone else, particularly like wants or needs in the society. It's called the socialist economic calculation problem. And also the government has a lot of perverse incentives in that, people would lobby the government in order to take advantage of, the power that the government has, which means that you don't get this sort of efficient race to the top outcome necessarily that you do in a free market. And so it's the government that really gets in the way of things. But if you let the market ride, you usually get much better outcomes in the end.
I don't know how much time I have left, but I think a good last question is, how do you address governance apathy, right? Validators are supposedly supposed to be voting on proposals to like help further the chain, but we often see not many do. So I'm curious, maybe that can be a last sort of answer from each of you guys.
All right. Okay. So again, in Polkadot and Kusama, it's not just the validators; it's the token holders, right? So a validator has a vote, just like any other, but it may be seen by some as an informed vote. So you might get some extra delegations, and your vote may count a little more. So there are a few incentives, and this may be a bit. We are testing on Kusama, right? NFT, and there's some Sybil resistance built into this thing, so I'll keep it simple. NFTs as rewards. We trying to build, improve the voting experience as well. I think making it easy to say, okay, actually, I have it on my wallet right now. You can scroll across and you can see, okay, this is a topic that we are voting on. These are some human readable, and that's probably another point. We need to make these things easy to understand. This is what it's about. Am I voting yes? Am I voting no? Am I voting with conviction? Next. You know, so accessibility, there's incentive, which is, I think, you know, something to try and experiment with. But there's also accessibility, which I think is equally important. And to make informed decisions, I think we need to, there's a lot of focus on like staking and APY and stuff like that. There's also like a podcast that comes about every 1 week discussing the governance matters at hand. So those are some of the things that, you know, we're doing on our end. Yeah.
In general, I believe that whereas the entire blockchain technology has pushed forward incredibly far in the last couple of years, the governance space is basically stagnant. And the reason for it is that we see it as sort of a secondary over whatever else we're pushing at a particular time. And so I believe that we've neglected, you know, educating good governors. For example, we have not neglected good app developers, but when it comes to the actual act of governance, we are far behind in terms of education as an industry. And I think that education along with empowerment within the frameworks are the 2 points that will be crucial going forward. And coming back to the you know, the statement about the wisdom of the crowd. The wisdom of the crowd doesn't mean that the crowd is always right or that everyone is an expert at everything. It's exactly the opposite. It means that the crowd sometimes knows well, and that's because they have combined all of their knowledge from different areas, right? So if I'm a power user, my contribution to any governance framework will be completely different than a validator, right? But I can still contribute, and that is on you know, kind of providing the necessary feedback, right? So the validators know which direction the wind is blowing. So that would be I guess my answer, which would be empowerment and education.
Yeah, I think there's kind of like a few ways that you kind of increase government's participation. One is like in terms of like economics. So for example, I don't know, some of these protocols have been doing it, and we're kind of thinking about the idea at Fantom is, you know, in order to, like, for example, claim your rewards, in order to get some sort of benefit, you know, you need to participate in some way in the voting process for proposals that come about. So there's like economic incentives that you can do to encourage voting. The other aspect of increasing like voting participation is, you know, as the other panelists have said, like education, right? And so specifically for Fantom, you know, we have like a governance group, we have a variety of different groups that people have created in the community and the foundation has created, where we basically like discuss proposals that are being made. And so when we look at like a proposal being made, whether it's from the foundation or the community, you know, we kind of flag it and we say, you know, this is how it can impact you. And obviously as a foundation, we give our own opinion. And then, you know, basically the validators can decide, or the people who are delegated to the validators can decide which way they want to vote accordingly as a result. And so a lot of it comes down to just awareness as well. But you can also try and implement economic incentives as well, which is quite interesting because there's a lot of creativity there, I think.
So my take on that question of voter apathy is that, well, first of all, I think voter apathy is a fact, and we're not going to change that. So people just don't want to vote every week. And on multiple protocols. And I think any governance system that relies on people, regular token holders, voting very frequently is misguided and bound to fail. So what we're trying to do at the Q protocol is have a layered system where certain types of decisions need a broad support by the Q token holder community, but other more technical decisions don't. So you have a tiered system where the majority you need, the threshold you need, and so on, and also the question who has veto rights possibly, that's determined by the decision type. So I think a lot of aspects of increasing voter turnout are good, are helpful, but I think they won't fundamentally solve the solution of voter apathy. We know that from democracies, where you have direct democracy, people don't want to vote every day or every week or even every month. So I think governance system that takes into account of that is probably better than one that relies on very, very frequent votes from the majority of token holders.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, guys.